When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy channel. Today's video is going to be the first part of a longer series. I don't know how long we're going to go, but you might be noticing by the title, the thumbnail, that we're not really starting anywhere near Robert's Rebellion. And the cause of that is because to understand Robert's Rebellion and how things got so bad as they did, and to really evaluate the way the Targaryens handled the throne, and even some of the foreshadowing to the beginning of the war and a lot of our key figures, we have to go all the way back to Aegon V's reign. Now, the reason I'm pointing to Aegon V's reign is because it really paints the picture of how the Targaryen dynasty, its power was falling, the fears that they had seen coming. And Robert Baratheon was really kind of what Aegon V feared. And something that's very interesting is we're going to talk about with Aegon V's reign and why it's so important, as we actually saw a mini Baratheon rebellion. We saw Lionel Baratheon actually rebel from the throne and named himself the Storm King. Interesting foreshadowing to what we'll see only a few years later. And so before we get into this video and we continue on in this series, if you guys are looking forward to the rest of these parts, let me know down in the comments and subscribe for more. But let's get into it. So the massive part about Aegon V's reign that I want to talk about is, one, the weakening of House Targaryen. At the time of Aegon V, I would say the Targaryens, you had a lot of heirs. There still was a good amount of Targaryens. But here's the issue. Aegon V's children did not do him any favors. His heir, Small Duncan, did not end up marrying who he was supposed to marry. Again, this ended up leading to that Baratheon conflict that we talked about. His heirs did a very bad job of strengthening the ties with Westeros. Again, something we'll see like with House of the Dragon was that Viserys should have married Laena because of how much power it would give the Targaryens. This is kind of the problem that was going on here, where the Targaryens were getting weakened and weakened and weakened. And this didn't really help when we also saw Maelys Blackfyre, along with the Ninepenny Kings, rising in the east. So you have a growing threat. You see the Targaryens, even at this point, were not at their full power, right? They were definitely losing power. And so Aegon V is someone that saw this coming. He was someone that realized they were weak. How do you fix that issue? Well, Aegon became more desperate. Again, he didn't have the support of the high nobility. He was someone that was much more loved by the small folk. But again, in times of war, having the nobility on your side is very beneficial, right? Because if Maelys comes over, and Maelys is someone that they like more and willing to give them more things, you're going to back him, not Aegon. If you're someone like the Baratheons, who you've been spurned by Aegon's family, maybe you end up backing Maelys when he comes over. Those are the exact fears that I could have seen a character like Aegon V going through. Again, he is someone that grew up learning about why people would have supported the Blackfyres or the Targaryens. It's something we see heavily in the second Dunk and Egg novella. And so when you see all this, it kind of leads to this idea of Summerhall. And Summerhall is the most important point to discuss when we look at Robert's Rebellion. It has the birth of Rhaegar. It's what kind of pushes forward the succession and gets us closer to the Mad King heiress. And so we have Summerhall, and this is this event where it's supposed to bring back the dragons. Now, we don't know if this was, again, fueled by the idea of Aegon's dream. Again, that's something that George kind of implemented through more of the show. It's not really like a book thing. We have no knowledge of it in the book, but it could have been something that Aegon V knew about. And so you kind of put that alongside of, okay, we are losing power and there's a big threat. Like, Maelys was a big threat to Westeros at this point. And so Summerhall happens. You have this disaster, right? It kills Aegon, his first son, Small Duncan, like I talked about. It kills Duncan the Tall. And so now you're left with a lot of uncertainty. Jaehaerys II will become king, Aegon's second son. You will see the birth of Rhaegar right outside of Summerhall in the famous picture that I will have up on screen. And this is given to the idea that Rhaegar believed that he was the prince that was promised at this point. Maester Aemon also believed this exact same thing. And so this is vital because this is going to really explain and explore why Rhaegar does the actions that he does going forward. And so as we're going to continue in this video getting to the War of the Ninepenny Kings, which is, again, very important for connections. Connections is huge during this time period. And so let's go into that. So Jaehaerys II becomes king. And he was a king that I think actually had a lot of potential to be really good. Unfortunately, wasn't very king for very long. But he goes about saying, we need to take on the Stepstones. We need to take on Meleys Blackfire, the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Got to take on this threat now. Because if we give them more time to build up and grow in strength, this is only worse for us. Let's take the fight to them. That's something that really we hadn't seen with the Blackfire rebellions. It was always the Blackfires attacking Westeros or something like that. It was never we go and attack them. And so we take a different approach. And again, during this time, you had a lot of characters forming, and you can kind of already see the sides. So at this point, you had the Mad King, who wasn't mad yet. He was still a respectable young man, an heiress, and he was friends with Tywin. And he also would become friends with Steffon Baratheon, the father of Stannis, Robert, and Renly. So you had a lot of people meeting like that. We see a lot of our characters growing. Tywin is someone that, again, learns a lot of leadership, a lot of things he's going to take back, and how he takes over the Lannister family and how they, again, grow into prominence is because of this time period. We see characters like the Blackfish gaining a name for themselves, Barristan Selmy slaying Meleys the Monstrous. So we see a lot of things here forming, right? And what I think is really important to establish here is why these relationships are so important. Because again, Jaehaerys is going to die sooner rather than later. Aerys is going to assume the crown at, again, a very young age, and Tywin will end up being his hand. And so we have this relationship from the get-go, and in a lot of ways, Aegon's problem, Aegon V anyway, his problem was solved. You get the Lannisters very close to the crown. You have the Baratheons very close to the crown when just a little while ago, they were kind of in rebellion. So you see that faction start to form. Now, more importantly, we also get this idea that Lord Rickard Stark also made the acquaintances of Lord Aaron and also now Lord Baratheon, Steffon Baratheon. So why is this so important? Well, this is going to be the exact reason that Ned and Robert end up getting fostered in the Vale. Now, again, the Baratheons are a really weird one because Steffon Baratheon was a really good friend of Aerys and Tywin. Again, Steffon is sent off to go find a suitable partner for Rhaegar. That shows kind of the level of trust that was there. And so when we see this, this is kind of the forming of our sides. We see, again, already the Baratheons, the Vale, and the North already kind of making ties. Now, the Baratheons won't be fully onto the other side yet until later, after Steffon dies. But you can kind of see the lines being drawn. Now, the Tullys, again, they weren't really, that we know of, involved in this, but again, you had to have thought that these people would have seen someone like the Blackfish, and there would have been maybe that connection. And so when we look at this and we go, well, what allowed the seeds of war to start? We really have to look at this time period. We really have to see when, okay, all of our major players are kind of growing into their characters. And so this time would really become a Cold War, in my opinion, where we would start seeing the forming of alliances, and we would see kind of this northern coalition start to band together. And now this doesn't happen immediately, right? This is going to take place over years and years of Aerys's reign, but think about what's slowly going to happen. And this is going to be what we're going to talk about in the next video of this series. But in this first one, just think about it, right? We're not even at the generation that's going to be fighting in the war. We're in the generation before. And so that's what's so interesting to study about Robert's Rebellion, is that this was a conflict that was kind of brewing for generations. When we talk about, for instance, the Dance of the Dragons, that was a conflict that had been really boiling over for a long time. I think the real first foreshadowing to that event was Aenys' reign, when we see two different factions start forming with Maegor and Aenys. This exact thing had been happening already, right? When we look at the Blackfires, that was kind of the first step to this idea of somebody overtaking the Targaryens. And we even saw, again, like I talked about at the beginning of this video, the Baratheons had already rebelled against the crown. And they could have even learned from this. Like, right, yes, Stefan had a good relationship with them, but think about the Stormlands as well. They would have grown up knowing what happened to Lionel when he rebelled. He didn't have the support. And so when we start seeing a character like Robert then getting fostered over to the Vale, making ties, right? You're connecting Ned and Robert to grow up as brothers. So you're connecting really quickly the next generation, right? You're connecting when Stefan leaves. Well, Robert's going to be the person in charge, and now he's made connections with Ned. He's made connections with Jon Arryn. Okay, that's a scary thought. And so when you look at this from Aerys' point of view, so like again, the next video in this series is really going to be focused on Aerys and Tywin specifically. But when we really get into that next part, just keep this in the back of your mind. Yes, there were other things going on with why Aerys eventually went mad, and I've done a whole like 40-minute video on that, but was Aerys wrong that there was this coalition growing against his family? And when we look at, again, Aegon V and what had just happened in his lifetime of another Blackfire rebellion, it makes sense why he was wary. It makes sense why he was untrusting. And that's something we're going to study in the next video of the series, where we're going to focus mainly on this period right before we see Robert's Rebellion and some of the major events like Harrenhal. Because again, the tourney of Harrenhal going to be much closer to Robert's Rebellion. We're not going to hit that in the next video, but next video will definitely be more on building on the Mad King's kind of insanity, things like Duskendale and those of the like. So thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed the first part, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.